The massive screens covering the walls of Nexus Prime's command center showed the life of the galaxy. Thousands of tiny lights blinked and pulsed, each one representing a communication channel connecting distant worlds. Captain Jiho stood on his observation platform, watching the familiar dance of lights that had remained constant for over 1,000 years. "The outer rim channels are acting strange," Lieutenant Mina said from her station below, her blue-scaled. Hands moved quickly across the Vorthan control panel, trying to understand what was happening. "Sir, I'm getting interference reports from 17 different sectors." Jiho frowned and stepped closer to the main display. The lights were flickering now, going dark for brief moments before returning. It started with just a few channels in the distant reaches of the galaxy, but the darkness was spreading inward, like a wave. "Run a full diagnostic on the communication array," he ordered. "Maybe we have a system failure." But even as he spoke, more lights began to die. One by one, the channels that connected planets, space stations, and fleets across the galaxy went silent. Darkness moved with purpose, consuming communication networks faster than any technical failure could explain. "Sir, this isn't our equipment." Mina's voice carried a note of fear. "The entire galactic network is shutting down. Every hyperspace relay, every quantum beacon, all of it." Within minutes, the great display showed nothing but black. The galaxy had gone completely silent. Jiho had never experienced anything like this. For 3,000 years, galactic civilization had been connected by an invisible web of communication. Trade ships could contact their home ports from anywhere in the galaxy. Military fleets stayed in constant touch with their commanders. Scientists shared discoveries instantly across vast distances. Now, for the first time in recorded history, every world stood alone. Emergency protocols activated automatically. Red lights flashed throughout the command center as backup systems tried to establish contact with anyone, anywhere. But the silence was absolute. Even the local communication network that connected different parts of Nexus Prime began to fail. "Could cause this?" asked Commander Yuki, who had rushed into the command center when the alarm started. "As some kind of weapon?" Before anyone could answer, the long-range sensors began screaming with warnings. Every technician in the room turned to their instruments, trying to understand what was approaching from the galaxy's edge. "Unknown contact," reported sensor operator Hannah, her voice tight with concentration. "It's big, sir. Really big. Moving toward us at incredible speed." The main screen changed from the dead communication display to show sensor readings. A massive shape was approaching from the outer rim of the galaxy, where few civilizations had ever ventured. The vessel was unlike anything in their extensive databases. It was sleek and dark, shaped like a blade cutting through space itself. Its energy readings are off the charts, Hannah continued. "Whatever that thing is, it's surrounded by some kind of field that's absorbing everything around it. Radio waves, light, even quantum particles just disappear when they get close." As the mysterious ship drew nearer to Nexus Prime, the local systems began to fail completely. The lights dimmed, computers started shutting down, and even the air recycling systems struggled to function. The field around the approaching vessel seemed to devour all forms of electromagnetic energy. "Sir," Mina's voice was barely a whisper, "it's trying to communicate with us." "How is that possible?" Jiho demanded. "Our communication systems are dead. It's using primitive radio frequencies," she explained, adjusting her controls with shaking hands. "The kind of signals that ancient civilizations used before they developed hyperspace communication. I can barely pick it up." The message came through, filled with static, but the words were clear enough. A female voice spoke in the common galactic tongue, though with an accent that none of them recognized. "This is Captain Soman of the UES Prometheus. Representing the Terran Federation, you're requesting immediate docking permission and an audience with galactic leadership. Please respond on this frequency." The command center fell silent. Every person present stared at the communication console as if it might explode. "Terran Federation?" Commander Yuki whispered. "I've never heard of them." "Neither have I, Jiho." "Admitted, but they're using a dead language designation. Terra was the ancient name for the mythical human homeworld." The message repeated, patient but insistent. "This is Captain Salmon of the UES Prometheus. Communication silence is for your protection. Need to speak with your leaders immediately." Jiho looked around at his crew. They were all experienced officers who had dealt with first contact situations before, but this was different. This unknown ship had somehow silenced the entire galaxy, and now claimed it was for their protection. Grant them docking permission, he decided, but maintain full security protocols. And someone wake up the ambassadors. I have a feeling we're about to make history. As the dark vessel approached Nexus Prime's docking bay, Captain Jiho couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The galaxy had gone silent, and now strangers from the void were coming to explain why. The main docking bay of Nexus Prime buzzed with nervous energy. Never before had so many important people gathered in one place for a first contact meeting. Security guards from different species stood at attention around the massive space, their weapons ready but not aimed. The air itself seemed thick with tension. Ambassador Dongmin adjusted his formal robes and checked his translation device one more time. As the hegemony's chief diplomat, he had handled dozens of first contact situations, but this felt different. The mysterious ship that had silenced the entire galaxy now sat in their docking bay, dark and imposing. "Are we sure about this?" asked General Kyung, representing the Free Systems Alliance. Her military uniform was crisp, but her hand rested. On her sidearm, that ship could be carrying anything. "We have no choice," replied Hive Speaker June, whose collective consciousness represented billions of linked minds. "They silenced our entire civilization with ease. We must learn their intentions." The three major powers of the galaxy rarely agreed on anything, but the current crisis had forced them to work together. The hegemony controlled the military might of the galaxy's core worlds. The Hive world shared thoughts and decisions across countless planets. The Free Systems Alliance protected the rights of individual species and democratic governments. Together, they spoke for trillions of beings. A low humming sound filled the docking bay as the mysterious ship's airlock began to cycle. The sound was unlike anything they had heard before, deeper and more resonant than normal mechanical noise. Security scanners showed 3 life forms approaching the exit, but the readings were strange and unclear. "Remember," Dongmin whispered to his colleagues, "we know nothing about these beings. They could be hostile, or they could be our salvation. Okay. Let me handle the initial contact." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, releasing a cloud of vapor that quickly dispersed. 3 figures stepped out, and every person in the docking bay held their breath. The beings looked almost familiar, yet completely alien at the same time. They were roughly the same size as Vorthons, walking on 2 legs with 2 arms in normal body proportions. But their skin was smooth and pale, without scales or any protective covering. Their hair was dark and straight, falling around faces that seemed almost too perfect. What struck everyone most were their eyes. They were dark and deep, seeming to look right through anyone who met their gaze. These beings moved with fluid grace, like predators who had never known fear. Each step was calculated and purposeful, suggesting they were ready for combat at any moment. "I am Captain Soman," the lead figure announced. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying authority that made even experienced diplomats step back instinctively. "This is Commander Taiho, our science officer, and Lieutenant Hyun, our tactical specialist." She spoke the common galactic language perfectly, but with an accent that none of them could identify. Her uniform was simple, but clearly advanced, made from materials that seemed to shift and change in the light. Ambassador Dongmin stepped forward, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure despite his racing hearts. He had studied ancient texts and forgotten histories as a hobby, and something about these beings triggered a memory from the oldest records. "You're human," he whispered, the word escaping his lips before he could stop it. The reaction in the docking bay was immediate. Gasps and whispers spread through the gathered crowd. Humans were legend, a cautionary tale told to young beings about a species that had destroyed itself with nuclear weapons before they could reach the stars. They were supposed to be extinct, a reminder of what happened when intelligence developed faster than wisdom. "We are Captain Soman confirmed without any emotion. "We've been watching you for a very long time." The implications of her words hit everyone like a physical blow. If humans were real and had been watching galactic civilization develop, what did that mean? How long had they been out there? What did they want? Commander Tai-Ho stepped forward, his movements just as fluid as his captain's. "The field around our ship disrupts quantum consciousness networks," he explained in a calm, scientific tone. "We developed it out of necessity, to fight an enemy that spreads through organized thought itself." "What enemy?" General Kuhn demanded, her military training overriding her diplomatic caution. "What kind of threat requires silencing an entire galaxy?" The three humans exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Captain Summon's expression grew darker, and for a moment she looked older than her apparent years. "The same enemy that's returning to this galaxy," she said quietly. "We came to warn you and to offer alliance, because without us, you will all be consumed." The docking bay fell completely silent. The weight of her words settled over everyone present like a heavy blanket. These legendary beings, thought to be extinct, had emerged from the void to warn of some terrible threat. "Consumed by what?" Hive Speaker June asked, his collective consciousness struggling to process the implications. Lieutenant Han spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same predatory calm as his companions. "By something that turns organized matter back into chaos, something that feeds on consciousness itself." The humans stood perfectly still, waiting for the galaxy's leaders to absorb this information. Around them, the most powerful beings in known space realized they might be facing something beyond their understanding. The briefing room in Nexus Prime's secure level had been designed for the most important meetings in galactic history. It housed what might be the most crucial conversation any civilization had ever held. The room's walls were lined with representatives from every major species, their faces showing mixtures of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. Commander Tai-Ho stood at the center of the room, his hands moving over a control device that none of the assembled beings recognized. The air above him shimmered and suddenly filled with three-dimensional images that made everyone gasp. The images showed star systems, but not as they should be. Where planets should have orbited bright stars, there was only emptiness. Where thriving civilizations should have built cities and spaceports, there was nothing but void. Entire solar systems had been stripped clean, leaving behind only the cold darkness of space. "These are the Andromeda contact zones," Tai-Ho explained, his voice steady, despite the horrifying images floating around him. "What you're seeing happened? Over the past 200 years, 17 dwarf galaxies, each containing billions of stars and countless worlds, have been completely consumed." Ambassador Dongmin stared at the images, his scaled hands trembling slightly. "Consumed by what? What kind of weapon could do this?" "Not a weapon," Captain Soman answered from her position near the display controls. "The Devourers aren't invaders in any way we understand. They're entropy given physical form, existing only to break down organized matter and return it to its most basic components." The display changed to show something that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to bend and twist reality around them moved through space like living mathematics. They had no obvious weapons, no visible technology, yet everything they touched simply ceased to exist. "They don't conquer," Lieutenant Hune added, stepping into the light of the holographic display. "They don't build empires or take resources. They simply undo the work of billions of years of cosmic evolution, reducing complex matter back to quantum foam." General Kyung leaned forward in her chair, her military mind trying to process what she was seeing. "How do you know so much about them? How do you have these recordings?" Captain Summon's expression grew darker, and for the first time since arriving, she showed real emotion. "Because we've fought them before. 3,000 years ago, they first entered our galaxy. Humanity was young then, barely able to travel between the planets of our own solar system. We thought we were alone in the universe." The display shifted, again showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Cities covered the continents, and space stations dotted the system. Ships that looked primitive compared to current galactic technology moved between planets. carrying the hopes and dreams of a species just beginning to explore beyond their home. This was Earth, Salman continued, her voice carrying the weight of ancient grief, our homeworld, where humanity first developed consciousness and built civilization. We had just begun to reach for the stars when they found us. The peaceful scene exploded into chaos. The geometric entities appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving with purpose toward the inner planets. Human ships, tiny and desperate, tried to fight back against enemies that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. We lost everything, Salman said quietly. Earth was consumed first, along with our colonies on Mars and the outer worlds. 90% of our species died in the first wave of attacks. The survivors fled to the galactic rim, to the dark spaces between spiral arms where few other species had ever ventured. The images showed the desperate escape. Human ships limping away from their destroyed homeworld toward the empty regions of space. Some ships didn't make it, consumed by the pursuing entities. Others barely escaped, carrying the remnants of human civilization into exile. We've been preparing ever since, Commander Taiho explained. Living in the void, developing technology specifically designed to fight these entities. Everything we've built over the past 3 millennia has been focused on one goal: stopping them from consuming other civilizations. Lieutenant Heian moved to another control panel, and the display changed to show complex diagrams that none of the assembled beings could fully understand. Our silence field isn't just a defensive measure. It's a necessity. The Devourers spread through quantum consciousness networks, using organized thought as a pathway to locate and consume new targets. The implications of this statement rippled through the room like a shockwave. Every species present depended on quantum communication networks to maintain their civilizations. The very thing that connected them across the galaxy also made them vulnerable to these entities. You're saying our communication systems make us targets? General Kyung asked, her voice tight with realization. More than targets, Captain Soman. Confirmed, they make you beacons. The moment the Devourers detect organized quantum consciousness, they move to consume it. We've been shielding you without your knowledge, maintaining barriers around this galaxy for thousands of years. But our defenses are failing. The display shifted one final time, showing massive structures approaching from the empty space between galaxies. They were enormous beyond comprehension, geometric forms that seemed to twist space around them as they moved toward the Milky Way. They're coming, Taiho announced, his words falling into the silent room like stones into still water. Guess, and we estimate 6 months before they arrive in force. The room remained silent as the assembled representatives absorbed this information. The galaxy's greatest civilizations had just learned they're about to face extinction. The deepest conference room in Nexus Prime had never held so many different species at once. The massive chamber stretched out in concentric circles with representatives from hundreds of worlds filling every available seat. The air recycling systems worked overtime to accommodate the breathing needs of so many different life forms, creating a constant background hum that matched the tension in the room. For 3 days, the debate had continued without pause. Voices rose and fell in dozens of languages as species argued about humanity's proposal. Some delegates pounded their tables with fists, claws, and tentacles. Others sat in worried silence, calculating the odds of survival with and without human help. Captain Soman stood in the center of it all, flanked by Commander Taiho and Lieutenant Heiyun. The 3 humans looked tiny compared to some of the massive alien representatives, but their presence dominated the room. Everyone knew they held technology that could save or destroy galactic civilization. This is madness, declared Ambassador Dongmin, his voice carrying across the chamber. You're asking us to hand over control of our fleets, our planets, our entire way of life to a species that claims to have been watching us for thousands of years. How do we know you're not the real enemy? Murmurs of agreement rippled through sections of the assembly. The hegemony delegation nodded approvingly, while several smaller species voiced similar concerns. The fear was understandable. Humanity had demonstrated power beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. We understand your concerns, Captain Soman replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. We're not asking for surrender or submission. We're offering partnership. But it has to be complete partnership, unified command structure shared, technology, and acceptance of our protective protocols. Why should we trust you? Shouted Representative Bora from the Outer Rim territories. You say you've been protecting us, but we never asked for protection. Maybe we would have been fine without your interference. Commander Taiho stepped forward, his expression serious. Because we could have destroyed you already if that was our intention. The chamber fell silent as Taiho activated a small device. On his wrist, the air around him shimmered, and suddenly everyone could see something impossible happening. The large viewport that showed the stars outside began to change. The transparent material flowed like water, reshaping itself into complex, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as the solid matter of the viewport twisted and reformed, creating intricate sculptures that defied physics. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. The viewport was exactly as it had been before, showing the familiar stars beyond the station. Matter manipulation, Taiho explained calmly, as if he had just demonstrated something as simple as turning on a light. This is one of 17 different technologies we developed specifically to fight the Devourers. We also have consciousness transfer capabilities, temporal distortion fields, and weapons that can restructure space-time itself. The demonstration had the desired effect. The chamber remained completely quiet as the implications sank in. If humans could reshape matter with a thought, it could indeed have destroyed galactic civilization whenever they chose. General Kyung was the first to find her voice. If you have such incredible power, why do you need us at all? Why not fight this war yourselves? Summon's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of emotion she had displayed during the entire conference. Because we're not fighting for territory or resources or political control. We're fighting for the right of consciousness to exist in this universe. And that kind of fight requires every thinking being who's willing to stand up and defend their existence. Lieutenant Heian activated another display, showing the current state of galactic defenses. We're powerful, but we're also few in number. The Devourers aren't just a military threat, they're an existential one. They consume the very concept of organized thought. We need every mind, every perspective, every creative solution that the galaxy's civilizations can provide. The debate continued for hours, but the tone had changed. Instead of arguing about whether to trust the humans, the delegates began discussing how the alliance would work. Some species worried about maintaining their independence. Others questioned whether their outdated technology could be useful against such advanced enemies. The final vote was closer than anyone had expected. Species that had been enemies for centuries found themselves on the same side, while old allies split over the decision. In the end, it was the smaller civilizations that decided the outcome. They had witnessed the destruction of the outer colonies and understood that cooperation was their only chance for survival. The alliance was formed by a narrow margin, with humanity providing advanced technology and strategic leadership, while the galaxy's civilizations contributed their numbers, local knowledge, and diverse perspectives to the war effort. Lieutenant Heian immediately began coordinating the massive preparation efforts. Fleet yards across the galaxy worked around the clock to retrofit ships with human technology. Silence fields were deployed around major population centers, creating protective bubbles of disrupted quantum consciousness. Millions of beings from hundreds of species began training in combat techniques designed for fighting enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. Captain Jiho watched from the command center as enhanced fleets deployed across the galaxy. The ships looked the same on the outside, but he knew they now carried weapons and defenses beyond his understanding. Will it be enough? He asked Captain Soman, who stood beside him observing the preparations. She looked out at the stars, her expression unreadable. It has to be, because if we fail, consciousness itself dies in this galaxy.
Wow.
The Devourers came from the dark between galaxies like a storm made of living geometry. Their massive forms blocked out entire star systems, casting shadows that stretched across light years of space. Where they passed, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. As if the universe was struggling to understand what these entities truly were, Admiral Junho stood on the bridge of the Unity, the most powerful ship the galaxy had ever built. Around him, officers from dozens of different species worked together at stations that combined their own technology with human enhancements. The ship hummed with energy that felt alive, responding to thoughts as much as to commands. Enemy contact. In 30 seconds, Commander Taiho reported from his sensor station. His voice was calm, but everyone on the bridge could feel the tension. Through the viewports, they could see the Devourers approaching shapes that hurt to look at directly. Moving with purpose toward the inner systems of the galaxy, Captain Soman stood beside Admiral Junho, her hands dancing over controls that seemed to respond to her mind rather than her touch. All fleet units maintain formation. Remember, conventional weapons won't work against these entities. Trust your human-enhanced systems and follow your training. The battle began without warning or ceremony. The Devourers didn't announce their attack or demand surrender. They simply moved forward, and everything they touched began to dissolve. Entire squadrons of Allied ships vanished in seconds, their complex matter reduced to basic particles that scattered into space, but the enhanced fleets held their ground. The silence fields that surrounded each ship created pockets of stable space where normal physics still worked. When Devourer attacks tore through hull plating, the matter manipulation systems rebuilt the damage instantly. When crew members were lost to the reality-warping effects, their consciousness was preserved in quantum storage systems. "Incredible," whispered Admiral Junho, as he watched a cruiser that had been completely destroyed rebuild itself in moments. "Your technology is beyond anything we imagined." Lieutenant Heian worked frantically at her station, coordinating the expanding silence fields that protected populated worlds. "The fields are holding, but barely. These entities are adapting to our defenses faster than we predicted." On the main screen, the Devourers began to pulse with new energy patterns. Their attacks, which had been random and chaotic, suddenly became focused and precise. Ships that had been protected by silence fields began to fail as the entities learned to penetrate their defenses. "They're learning," Captain Soman said grimly. "We always knew they would adapt eventually. It's what makes them so dangerous." The battle raged across multiple star systems simultaneously. In the outer colonies, entire worlds were consumed despite the desperate efforts of their defenders. In the core systems, massive space stations fought impossible battles against enemies that existed partially outside normal space and time. Captain Jiho commanded one of the defensive fleets protecting Nexus Prime. His ship, enhanced with human technology, fought alongside vessels from species that had been enemies just months before. The crisis had united them in ways that centuries of diplomacy could never have achieved. "Sir, the silence fields around the civilian sectors are failing," reported his communications officer. "The entities are breaking through our defenses." "All units fall back to secondary positions," Jiho ordered. "Can't let them reach the population centers." But even as he spoke, he knew it might not be enough. The Devourers were adapting too quickly, learning to counter every defense the Allied forces deployed. Victory was slipping away with each passing moment. Captain Soman closed her eyes and interfaced directly with the human fleet network. Her consciousness expanded to encompass hundreds of ships, each one responding to her thoughts and commands. "All human units prepare for Protocol Omega. This is our final option." Admiral Junho turned to face her, his expression shocked. "Captain, that protocol will sterilize entire sectors of space. The damage will be irreversible." "Better sterile than consumed," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of ancient loss. "We've seen what happens when these entities win. Nothing remains. Not matter, not energy, not even memory." The final assault began as the human ships revealed their true nature. They weren't vessels in any traditional sense. They were living entities evolved over thousands of years specifically to fight existential threats. Their hulls opened like flowers, revealing cores of pure energy that pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of a species that had sacrificed everything for survival. The human ships merged with the Devourers in explosions that warped reality itself. Space and time twisted around the impact points, creating cascades of destruction that reduced both forces to quantum foam. The energy release was visible from neighboring galaxies, a final desperate effort to preserve consciousness in the universe. When the battle finally ended, the cost was staggering. Half the galaxy's star systems were uninhabitable, their space warped beyond repair. Billions of beings had been lost. The communication networks that had connected galactic civilization were permanently damaged. In the aftermath, Captain Salmon stood before the surviving representatives in what remained of Nexus Prime. Her form flickered like a hologram, her consciousness already beginning to return to the void between stars. "We are the galaxy's immune system," she explained to the assembled delegates. "We evolved to fight threats like this. The peace and prosperity you've known was possible because we were watching from the darkness, always ready to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good." Captain Jiho stepped forward, his voice heavy with emotion. "Will you stay with us now? Help us rebuild what was lost?" Salmon smiled sadly. "We'll be close, always watching and always ready." The galaxy is quieter now, but it's also protected, and consciousness endures. The human ships faded into the void, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by the price of survival.